WT slaying.
Salama family, salama. How y'all doing today? Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom. Today we have with us the mental abolitionist, Sister Shantae Charles. Welcome, Sister Shantae, back to Tail Ministries. How you doing?
I am good. How are you?
Blessed and highly favored. So we're going to be talking today, family, about Black love. And we're going to look at some of the misconceptions about that as well. So, Sister Shantae, you want me to add the display?
Yes, go ahead and do that.
All right. So what I'm going to do as well, I'm going to make it full screen since you're, since none of us showing our face.
That's
All
right.
right, there we go. All right, it's yours, Sister Shantae.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I hope everybody has been having a blessed rest, a blessed Sabbath. I just want to first of all say thank you to this ministry for having me. I do not take it for granted that we have an opportunity to come before you all and share on this topic. So if you were with us last time, we had a presentation about the African Messiah. And at the end of that presentation, we started getting into the conversation about Black love and about Black community and what is happening with us. And so I said, well, let's table that discussion because it is very extensive. And even on tonight, with what we're going to cover, I'm not going to be able to cover everything. I really did have to narrow this down, but I wanted to start first with origin. I wanted to start first of all with origin stories and how origin stories matter. So I wanted to share a little bit of my own origin story because sometimes when people have these conversations or they start talking about this subject, I know people kind of get up in arms, right? Or they say, well, who are you to tell us this? Or, where are you coming from? What is your intent behind talking about this particular subject? And so this is a little bit of my origin story. I come from the descendants. I am a descendant of the formerly enslaved. We weren't born slaves. We were enslaved in this country. And so my origin story starts out with my love for Black people, my love for my heritage, my love for the Black men that are in my life. So what you see here on screen is my grandmother and my grandfather, my uncles, my father and my husband, my brothers. So I just wanted to just kind of give you a picture of why my origin story is leading me to talk about this particular subject matter. I grew up not necessarily in a two-parent household, though my mother and my father communicated. I didn't necessarily grow up with my father, but I did grow up with the support of my entire community. I grew up with my uncles. I grew up around men who protected me, men who cared for me. And so as I just continue this, I grew up with men who People talk about there's this hashtag, the black man can, but I say the black man not only can, but he does. So I've been fortunate enough to see generations of black love. I've been fortunate enough to see black men marrying. My uncles, marrying their wives, working, serving in the military, raising their children, my cousins, taking care of their families. So I wanted to put up some actual pictures. These are not stock photos. These are my uncles and my cousins doing what black men do that the media is really bent on obscuring. So are they perfect? No, they're not perfect, but they are real and they are present and they're working on their manhood and their fatherhood. So shout out to the black men that not only can, but to the black men that do. And so I just wanted to start there before we really dig into this topic. So black life, again, is so much more than what is portrayed. We live, we love, we kick it. There's me in the corner hanging out with my brothers. We serve our country. I come from 4 generations of black men who have served in the military, armed forces, Air Force, all of that. We serve this country. We graduate. We receive awards from the city. Black life is thriving. Now, again, we live in a society that does not necessarily focus on what is thriving about us. I believe some of that is coming to the forefront, but for me, it's not enough. So I just, again, wanted to share a little bit of my own origin story with you before we jump in. So how do we see each other? That is the first thing I want us to start thinking about. How do we see each other? And have we been looking at each other through the lens of white supremacy, posing as who we are as a people or as our character? So that's where we're going to start first. So one of the comments that I saw last week that I wanted to address, the comment says that black women are taught to worship black men. And it's actually not true. I know from my own experience, I have been able to have a love and a respect for black men because of my direct contact, right? My direct family line, what I've seen with my uncles, what I've seen with my cousins, and my continuing generations, and how they love black women, how they treat the women in our family, how they commit to black women. But society has done a really good job of conditioning us, including the black woman, that the black man is dangerous, that he is worthless, and that he is not to be trusted. So I don't know who's going around doing these lessons on worshiping black men, but that is not what I have seen. I have actually seen the opposite. So a couple of days ago, I did a Google image search and I just typed in black men, and that's what this screenshot is, because this is what came up when I searched on Google black men. And the first image is actually like a clip art. And then the first 3 real images were of black men who were either killed or beaten by police. So that's just in a basic, Google search on black men. This is what the world, what the algorithms right now are bringing up about black men. That if you're going to love one, if you're going to be connected to one, that this is the image. Is he going to have a knee on his neck? Is he going to be chased down in his neighborhood and shot by vigilante, citizens, or beaten by the police? And so again, these images don't make me want to say, oh, let me go and marry a black man. I'm going on 21 years of marriage in July. So I just want to share with you and show you what is the latest algorithm in Google. That was, again, June 2nd. So in a 2011 study, Media Representations and Impact on the Lives of Black Men is what the study is called. It was conducted by a company called the Opportunity Agenda. Negative mass media portrayals were strongly linked with lower life expectations amongst Black men. These portrayals constantly reinforced in print media, on television, the internet, and fiction shows, print advertising, and video games shape the public views of and attitudes toward men of color. We can say all day long that it's just entertainment, but it is actually linked with lower life expectations for Black men. So it's not only helping to create barriers to advancement within our society, but it also makes these positions of Black men seem like a natural, inevitable thing. That this is just how Black men are. This is, what's inevitably going to happen.
So, quick question before you continue.
Mhm.
Why do you think the Black man is targeted? Because I don't see other races targeted like this.
Well, we're going to get into that. But I mean, if you think about our origin and you think about the power of who we are originally, if you think about the power of our genetics and our DNA, to me, that would be a reason to target you. That in itself.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. And I put down here the quote by Tracy Blackman. She said, she's a reverend. She said, when the color of your skin is seen as a weapon, you will never be seen as unarmed. You will never be seen as not dangerous in this society. But we have a responsibility to not buy into these portrayals. So let's deal with it. Now, men in media, this is an actual study, and this is called the normal gap. It shows that the modern man does not see himself represented in advertising, on TV, or in the movies. So as seen in the media, you're more likely going to see the images of men that portray them as either a pretty boy or a skirt chaser or the action hero. You're less likely to see images of men in the media that portray them as good-hearted or trying to do the right thing or hardworking or self-sacrificing or even protective and fatherly. Because even with shows that have a male figure or a father figure, it usually tends to be comedy, and the man is usually made fun of is if he is the protective fatherly type. Okay. And so another study by Rutgers University, media portrayals of Black men contribute to police violence. So again, when people say it's just entertainment, this entertainment is trickling over into real life outcomes for Black men. That's what I want people to understand. So 75%, when white Americans were asked, hey, do you have any Black friends? 75% of white Americans reported having social networks comprised entirely of white people with no minority presence. Now, I know there are some people that are like, hey, I'm not interested in being in their presence, right? But what happens is they're having a lack of meaningful relationship. They're having a lack of contact with people of color means that they're associating the only thing they get to see, which is those images. That's what's getting circulated to them about who Black people are. And so when somebody says it really doesn't matter, it's just entertainment, well, if you're only getting your ideas about who Black people are from entertainment because you don't have any Black people around you, this is a problem. Especially when those images are largely negative, degrading, one-dimensional, etc. So we're going to get into these stereotypes. Stereotypes of Black men. The first one, a lot of people are probably familiar with this one, but it is the Sambo. Sambo is one of the most enduring stereotypes in American history. It's a pervasive image. It's supposed to be this simple-minded Black man, and it actually dates back as far as colonization in America. It's a stereotype that flourished during the reign of slavery in the United States. This is kind of the notion of the happy slave, but it's also the character in Uncle Tom's Cabin, who was the sellout and the vicious pawn for his master. So a lot of times when we hear people say Uncle Tom, what they actually should be saying is Sambo, because Sambo was the one who was for the master and betrayed black people, abused black women, etc. All right. So that's one stereotype. Another one, this is interesting because it wasn't even a black person. It was a white person in blackface. This is Jim Crow. So again, this is in the early 19th century. White performers were darkening their faces with burnt cork, and they were painting these exaggerated lips over their own, sometimes white, sometimes red. They would put on woolly black wigs, and they would take the stage to basically mock black people, basically with what they thought we were like. So again, this whole notion of black facing, which is now blackfishing on Instagram, it's the caricature, mockery of black people. This so-called city dandy was the northern counterpart to the southern plantation darky, also known as Sambo. Then you have Uncle Remus, or what some people call the magical Negro. This is kind of, in cartoons, it would be the old black man with the rabbit. He was nice. He was charismatic. He was an old Negro who told cute little stories. He had no problems, no stress. He was just laughing and pleasant and just a cutie. So this can be seen in movies. A lot of people say Morgan Freeman is known for, playing these kinds of roles. He's kind of like the eternal assistant to the white hero in the film. This particular stereotype, the black person's leadership skills are pretty much non-existent. He can also be the gay black friend to the white woman in film as well. He may or may not actually have magical powers, but he will always have knowledge that the white hero doesn't, and he'll be able to help him and guide him to his goals. And he's all about improving white life. This is a stereotype. I want to reiterate that. Okay. The other stereotype when it comes to black men is the savage. We see this in, way back 1915, 1920 with the premiere of the film Birth of a Nation. During Reconstruction period, this particular film actually reinvigorated the Ku Klux Klan. This is again, it's that Jim Crow, it's that black facing that happens in this film, but then they tie it into the smaller scene up at the top is a still from the film where it's supposed to be black men taking over Congress, and they're lazy. They got their feet up on the desk. They're eating fried chicken in Congress. So this idea of if black people get into power, this is what's going to happen, started with this film, The Birth of a Nation. So following emancipation, the image of this life-threatening brute from the dark continent was revitalized through this film. And because of this film, there was a spike in racial violence. As I said, the Ku Klux Klan got reinvigorated, and people began to justify and encourage racial violence against black men because of this stereotype. So the message was, we got to put black people in their place or else they're going to take over. And you can see that in some of the political rhetoric happening even right now. This is another one that's probably more familiar with people, the Mandingo, or the black buck. White slave owners promoted the notion that enslaved African men were animals by nature. They said, for example, that in the Negro, all passions, emotions, and ambitions are almost entirely dominated by their sexual instinct, contributing to perceptions of bestiality and primitivism. This was the definition of a Mandingo, that dangerous and untamable black slave that must be curbed because he has sexual instincts that would probably pervert the daughters and wives of white masters. So this, along with the savage, okay, both of those stereotypes working together begins to promote this fear of the black man, taking their daughters. And you still see this rhetoric happening today. Now, you also see people who play into this stereotype. Okay, as you can see the Vogue cover there. So there are people who allow themselves to be used to promote this stereotype that is not helpful for our community. After the American Reconstruction, the term black buck was used to reinforce this stereotype. Black bucks are usually muscular men who defy the will of the whites and are a menace to American society. They are considered excitable, restless, moody, impulsive, extremely violent, and sexually attracted to white women and only white women. So, what did this result in? As this stereotype began to spread in this country, it resulted in more lynchings, right? There's record after record of, black men accused of raping the daughter of so and so. There's historical records on it. You can go and look it up. But it increased lynchings because of this stereotype. Black men were killed, hanged, and beaten for being a threat to the virginal young white woman. The men who were sexually assaulted were sometimes sexually assaulted by their masters in front of the community, and they were deemed buck broken. Okay. So today's descriptions of black men are reductions of these descriptions in the past. I just wanted to bring us from historical stereotypes that are still working in our society today. I'm sure you could probably look at a lot of movies and just pick them all out. But these reductions are now thug, OG, baby daddy, family man, pimp, simp, high value man. All of these descriptions are coming out of stereotypes. That's what I want you guys to kind of hone in here. Now, don't think they just started stereotyping black men and we're going to leave black women out. Come on. I mean, there are stereotypes on both sides. So stereotypes of the black woman, the mammy, okay? The mammy was a large, independent woman with pitch black skin and shining white teeth. She wore a drab calico dress and headscarf and lived to serve her master and mistress. The mammy understood the value of the white lifestyle. The stereotype suggests that she raised the masses' children and loved them dearly, even more than her own. Her tendency to give advice to her mistress was seen as harmless and humorous. Although she treated whites with respect, she was a tyrant in her own family. She dominated her children and her husband, the Sambo, with her temper. This image of the mammy as the controller of the African American male was used as further evidence of the black male's inferiority to whites. So we have some men in our community who have kind of taken hold to this idea of the mammy. And that has been something, again, that is a stereotype. These, when I say stereotypes, these were caricatures of black people. These were labels put on us and then perpetrated repeatedly throughout film and television and advertising. So you don't get away from these stereotypes because they are entrenched in American entertainment, especially. All right. The matriarch. She's a little slightly different from the mammy. She can be considered masculine in her looks and temperament. She was not seen as a sexual being or a threat to white women. So you will see this stereotype of the matriarch in lots of films. Sometimes she's obese. She's a matronly figure with ample bosom. And behind this, she is, in other words, supposedly the antithesis of the European standard of beauty because she was non-threatening to whites. So again,
Oprah Winfrey.
You will see this, or you will see people that represent these stereotypes because, again, in American society, these stereotypes are put on display. And so they'll use people that fit the stereotype. They'll promote them. They'll give them advertising dollars. They'll put them on a pedestal because They fit a stereotype that they want you to buy into. Here's another one. The sapphire, also known as the angry black woman. Sapphire was a stereotype solidified through the hit show Amos and Andy. This popular series began on the radio in 1926, and then it was developed into a television series ending in the 1950s. This cartoon show depicted the Sapphire character as bossy, headstrong, engaged in verbal battles with her husband or another man. Sapphire possessed the emotional makeup of Mammy and Aunt Jemima combined. Her fierce independence, cantankerous nature placed her in the role sometimes of the matriarch. She dominated her husband by emasculating him with verbal put-downs. Again, this stereotype was immensely humorous to white Americans. Okay? So this is a stereotype that because white Americans enjoyed seeing black women in this stereotype, they continue to push it.
Wait a minute. That looked like an urban apologist to me. I'm sorry, family. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
All right. So here's another stereotype of black women: baby mama and welfare queen. The baby mama or the welfare queen trope was popularized by President Reagan. Welfare queen is the label used by a lot of the conservative population to denounce poor black women. Ironically, though, white women make up the majority of women on welfare. Okay. I think I might be coming to the last one or the second to last one here. This is the Jezebel. This image of the bad black girl represented the undeniable sexual side of African American women. The traditional Jezebel was light-skinned, slender mulatto with long straight hair and small features. She more closely resembled the European ideal for beauty than any pre-existing images. So whereas the Mammy and Aunt Jemima and Sapphire were decidedly asexual or unattractive for some, this stereotype was immensely attractive to white males. The creation of the hypersexual seductress Jezebel served to absolve white males of responsibility in sexual abuse and the rape of African American women. Black women in such cases were said to be asking for it. So again, we got to look at where these stereotypes are coming from. And we also do need to pay attention to people who are willing to buy into those stereotypes for money to keep promoting them in our society. Stereotype, the tragic mulatto. She is similar to Jezebel. She is a stereotypical fictional character that appeared in American literature during the 19th and 20th century, starting in 1837. It is the idea that ethnic mixing is harmful against nature and nothing good can come of it. So the tragic mulatto, the tragic mulatto is that stereotype. And like I said, again, we'll get into that some more. I'm going to need to, let me pull this really quickly down because I think I'm using an older version. So let me come back here to.
I removed it from the display, and when you're ready, I'll add it back.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm using the correct one here. Yeah. Give me 1 second. Because I think I want to make sure I did not leave any of them out. Let me see. Yep. Okay.
All right. You ready?
So do I need to share again?
No, I'll add it.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. There we go.
All right. Lastly, the angry black woman. Because we have allowed these stereotypes to sort of fester and grow in our neighborhoods, in our homes, in our communities, We've taken on stereotypes that were literally put upon us. These are labels that were put upon us. These were not things we were calling ourselves. Now these tropes are being placed on young Black girls and Black boys who are still in their development stage of who they will be and who they will become. Okay? So what we're doing now, or what's happening now, is children are being adultified, meaning they're not being given the opportunity to simply be children. They're now getting these same labels. This is why you have them arresting 6-year-olds and 9-year-olds and telling them to stop crying. They're a child. That's why they're crying. So it's this stealing of childhood now that's even happening. So when we feed into the stereotypes, we see each other only as problems to avoid and not mates to build solutions with. Let me say that again. When we feed into these stereotypes, we see each other only as problems to avoid and not mates to build solutions with. We must recognize the myths we've been fed about each other and the self-fulfilling prophecies of becoming what you behold with the help of systemic policies that have plagued us since our arrival to these shores. So we have to recognize that we've been looking at each other primarily through the lens of white supremacist stereotypes and tropes that are still working to this day to divide us from each other to seek a more desirable, quote unquote, counterpart. Now, let's be clear. White society has stereotypes as well. And I'm quite sure there are a lot of people who recognize all of these pictures because they come from a very popular channel by the name of Hallmark. So white society has stereotypes as well. They spend billions of dollars promoting heterosexual couples who fall in love, marry, and have children with very few interspersed negative stereotypes. So somebody actually made this. Someone actually made this because they were like, the plot of Hallmark movies are so predictable that the main character's name is going to be one of these: Beth, Carrie, Linda, Lindsay, Sarah, Becky, Karen, right? She's gonna live in a certain place. She's gonna have a certain career. She's not gonna be no stripper. She's not gonna be no pole dancer. Like, in other words, the script and the plot rarely changes because they are reinforcing positive stereotypes within their own agenda to keep reproducing. So I want us to understand this. It is a script in the plot, but their script and their plot lends toward the uplift and the positive stereotype to keep their people reproducing. Now, I know somebody's asking the question, well, where is our positive stereotypes? And so that's going to be a question for the writers. That's going to be a question for the filmmakers. That's going to be a question for people who are in those spaces to start asking some deeper questions about why are you playing to these stereotypes that you know are detrimental and damaging to our community.
Sister Shantae, they want to know if you can make that a little bigger.
Which one?
The presentation.
I think if I make it bigger, I'm not going to be able to see my behind the scenes screen. So let me try. Can you see that? Is that bigger?
Yeah, that's a lot better.
Okay. Let me see. All right, is that bigger?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure it's going to the right slide. So which slide can you all see right now?
Right now we're looking at the Hallmark Christmas movie plot.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So again, most of us can look at this. If you've seen a Hallmark movie, you can look at this and say, yep, this is exactly right. Created barriers to Black love. So now that we know that we've had some stereotypes working against us. Let's talk about the created barriers to Black love, because there are some. There are historical and institutional barriers. Most Black women in the U.S. are single by circumstance, not by choice. Black men, we know right now, are experiencing the highest mortality rate, unemployment rate, and incarceration rates in the country. Notice I said by design. So Black love is entangled with the structural power of the United States and has been since our arrival to this country. There has been state enforced forbidden love that has afflicted Black women and the entire community. So what do I mean by that? Let's talk. From the early 1500s to the mid 1800s, we were brought against our will to the Americas, not for love, but for the labor and profit that our bodies could produce. So sexual labor, sexuality for us in this country did not start out with love. It did not start out with passion and commitment and all of those wonderful things. It started out as a labor practice because sexual labor delivered more capital to be used and more Black bodies to be used and taken into bondage. Now, there is a book that is getting ready to come out. I believe she may have just released it. It's called Wake by Dr. Rebecca Hall. She was instrumental in doing some deep diving research into slave ship voyages. Now, this is records that were already there, but because the people doing the research were not Black and they were not women, which is why it's important for us to be in these spaces many times, they overlooked this actual research. Hall discovered that out of the 35,000 slave ship voyages documented, that there were revolts in about 1/10 of them. And when she analyzed the difference between ships that had revolts and those that did not, she discovered there were more women on the ships with the uprisings. So when she went to the historians about what she was finding, they told her, oh, this must be a mistake. This must be a fluke, because we know that the women didn't revolt. But when she examined the procedures for running the ships, right at the top was the instruction to keep everybody below deck and chained while they were on the coast of Africa. But once they got into the Atlantic, you could unchain the women and the children and bring them on deck. So she began to find these stories about how women were accessing the weapons chests and they were finding ways to unchain the men below. So they were using their mobility and their access in order to get everybody free in these uprisings before they even got to these shores. So when you talk about our ability to work with each other, our ability to fight for each other, our ability to partner with each other in freedom, we have been using our access to free ourselves even before we arrived to these shores. And I think it is important for us to start learning and knowing our own story, because for so long it has been told by people who do not have our best interests in heart. Okay? So I wanted to talk about that. This is what was happening before we got on these shores. People were fighting to get out of enslavement. Now, I can't imagine any Black man who was chained below. I can't imagine him saying to the woman who's handing him a weapon or unchaining him, I cannot imagine him saying, how dare you be a woman and give me a weapon? How dare you be a woman and unchain me? So we understood that there was a partnership that happened in getting free. Let me keep going because I don't want to start preaching. So an imbalance in population by design. A lot of people talk about there being an imbalance between the number of Black men and the number of Black women. Again, this is by design. In a study of 2,588 slaves in 1860 by an economist who was doing the recording at the time, he found that on slave holdings with at least one woman, the average ratio of women to men exceeded 2 to 1. The imbalance was greater in the states that were selling women, and the excess of women over men was 300 per 1,000. So historically, there has been an imbalance between us. Now, let's talk a little bit about something that white people understand, but maybe some of us don't understand. Mendels laws of heredity. Okay. I'm taking a moment to dip into science real quick. So Gregor Mendel was a Moravian monk who discovered the laws of genetic inheritance while breeding the lineage of plants. I want you to notice the dates that he does this research. Between 1856 and 1863, he's doing this research, and he is tracing the genetic lineage of plants, and he realizes something. His paper gets published in 1866, right after shortly after the end of the Civil War, but then his work gets rediscovered again and brought back up to the forefront in the 1890s. He figures out that two recessives result in a recessive, and two dominant genes, or a dominant and a recessive gene, results in the organism expressing dominant traits. How does this get translated into what's happening today? Well, they understand that the only way you can remain recessive as a people, okay, is for you to mate with someone else who is recessive. So this is how you get into what they call anti-miscegenation laws, or laws against mixing, because they're realizing anytime a dominant person or a person with dominant traits mates with somebody who is recessive, I don't care how many times you try to cut it up, the reality is they are dominant. They have the dominant trait. So it's never dominant plus recessive equals recessive, or dominant plus recessive equals mixed. It's dominant plus recessive equals dominant. So the only thing that has a recessive trait is when two recessive people get together. Anytime a person who has recessive traits gets with a person who has dominant traits, the science says it's dominant. This is why back then you had the one drop rule, because they understood this. Now we can make it whatever else we want it to be, but that's what the science says. Okay. So you have that happening in the 1860s, 1890s. They're understanding heredity. They're understanding loss of the recessive trait, okay, through miscegenation or through mixing. Many female slaves were the object of severe sexual exploitation, often bearing the children of their white masters, their masters' sons, or the overseers. Slaves were prohibited from defending themselves against any type of abuse, including sexual, at the hands of white men. If a slave attempted to defend herself, she was often subjected to further beatings by the master or even the mistress. Black females, some of them children, were forced into sexual relationships for their white owner's pleasure and for profit. Attempting to keep the slave population growing by his own doing, and not by importing more slaves from Africa, because when they closed off the ability to import, they had to find another way to keep the wheels of this profit center going. So then they introduced laws that says, hey, if the white slave master sleeps with his black female slave and she has a child, that child is considered enslaved. It is in bondage. However, if a white mistress sleeps with her black male bondsman, that child was considered free. So they did this because the white slave masters were doing most of the sexual exploitation. So they created laws literally that whatever babies he was creating, those babies would continue to be enslaved to keep the trade and the profit moving. So you're talking about dealing with lynching, false imprisonment, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, moving into welfare policies, moving into anti procreation agendas. All of this is happening to us. These are barriers to Black love. Okay? So even when people were getting married, even if the formerly enslaved Black man and the formerly enslaved Black woman chose to get married while they were in bondage, married bond persons were property in the eyes of the law. So they had no control over the destiny of their marriage, and they had no control over the destiny of their children while they were enslaved. Also, another thing we need to know is you had black union soldiers that were fighting. We're talking Civil War time, but even after that, throughout our service and time to the military, after fighting for the country, Black widows of deceased and disabled veterans were denied spousal pension benefits. This is affecting not just love, this is affecting our economy, this is affecting Black women's ability to take care of their children, even if they were widowed through something like war. So you have that happening. You have lynching that's happening, which is disappearing men and sons from their families. And sometimes entire families would be lynched. You also have what's called CPS. A lot of us understand what that is. Colorism and phenotype hierarchies that play into who is desirable or considered desirable as a mate. This dates back to enslavement mentality and the physical rewards that were given by the master for those who he either sired in that were enslaved. So you had these ideas, you had, the person who's in the field versus the person who's in the house. You had the person who is sired by the slave master versus the person who is not. We're talking right now historical and institutional barriers. Then you had government policies providing assistance to the poor that required men to disappear from the life of the woman and the child to just be fed. So this also plays a hand in the state of relationships as we see them happening and playing out today. Now, continuing talking about historical and institutional barriers, I want us to take a look really quickly at this map. You have the war on drugs and its effect on Black marriage in the 1980s and the 1990s. So again, you have the percentage of Black men who had never been married. Notice it spikes around 1940. 1950, it starts dropping. There's a war on poverty declared in 1964. 1971, oh, there's a war on drugs. And then it continues to drop down. So you're now with these quote unquote wars on poverty and wars on drugs, men who have non-violent offenses are being put in jail, many times either 20 years to life for whatever drug possession has happened and occurred. So you now have the prison population spiking. And with that, you have another avenue by which men are being taken out of a community. Again, we're talking about non-violent offenses. Then we have an employment issue. So where are the Black men with jobs? There's lots of conversation about that. We want to get married, but we're dealing with economic mobility issues. Nationwide, there are 93 Black men with full-time jobs for every 100 Black women with full-time jobs. Now, I tried to pull census records. I tried to pull records that were as current as possible. So these are from 2013 to 2017. So these are considered fairly recent as far as research. So you have here, you're looking at Black people who have full-time work, the top 5 metro areas. If you notice that the Black men outnumber the women, the bottom 5, the Black men don't outnumber the women in terms of who has a job. Okay. Then it goes into smaller metropolitan areas. I put this up here for the people who might need to know where to move. It's a little hint for you. All right. Smaller metropolitan areas, and then metropolitan areas with Black full-time working population. So again, nationwide, for on average, every 100 Black women that are working, there's about 93 men that are working. Talking about barriers to Black love. Single Black millennials. Okay? Simply put, there's actually an even number of Black men and women that have high incomes. This is based on the data from 2019. This is 2019 data. There is a deficit of Black men who have salaries lower than $50,000, but there is a surplus of Black women with salaries lower than $50,000. A surplus of Black men with no income. Black women outnumber Black men in every category of education above high school diploma, while Black men outnumber women with only a high school diploma and among single Black millennials who did not complete a high school diploma or GED. So higher salary Black women searching for a Black man with a comparable salary actually are evenly matched, which is not something that has been said. I don't think I've heard anybody say that. I've usually heard people say there are no good Black men, or there are no Black men making comparably what I am making. The data actually shows that's not true. You are evenly matched. 2019 data shows only 30% of African Americans were married compared to 48% of all Americans. Half, or 50%, of African Americans have never been married compared to 34% of all Americans. Just under half, or 48%, of Black women have never been married, which is up from 44% in 2008 and 42.7% in 2005. So Black marital status, as we can see, the number of never married men and never married women is relatively even. The question is, why are we not coming together? And I'm going to say that a lot of it has to do with what we have shared tonight. A lot of it has to do with stereotypes. A lot of it has to do with our mentality towards one another. A lot of it has to do with things that we have been feeding, or we have allowed to feed us, about the availability of both Black men and Black women. Now, again, going back to this thing about heredity, going back to this thing about Black men marrying out. I did check up on the data for that. So this is the data that I found. While Black men marry white women at twice the rate that Black women marry white men, in 2017, only 15% of Black men were married to non-Black women. Of the 15%, 9% of that was white. So it's not 75% of Black men are marrying white women. So I want us to make sure that we're listening and make sure that we're operating with actual data. Black men are marrying out of their ethnic demographic, but they are not marrying white women to the degree that the media portrays. Black women were the least likely of any demographic to marry non-Black men at only 7% in 2017. So we are not having this crisis of marrying outside. It's actually, the data showed Asian women actually marry outside more than Black women. Okay. So according to the recent data, this is the most recent data that I found. 85% of Black men have a Black wife. 93% of Black women have a Black husband. Okay? So whoever is pushing a narrative to you that we've all just lost our minds and we no longer love each other, I want you to give them some data. Data. All right? So where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Number one, I need us to recognize that both Black men and Black women are being played against each other. Work on yourself spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, intellectually, financially to ready yourself for a partner if you desire marriage. Seek professional counseling to heal from sexual, mental, emotional, spiritual trauma and abuse. And all of us really need to decolonize our mind from these stereotypes and images that we have of one another that were put on us as labels. Black men and women have been wounded in different areas by the system of white supremacy, and wounds rubbing against each other only spread illness. So we have to do the inner work in our own community to begin to heal. Understand you are better together. And as one of the persons that I have been in contact with who has been studying the Black family for the past 40 years, he said this to me. He said, without the Black family, there is no other humanity because we are the source DNA.
So, Sister Shantae, quick question, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
So in Christendom, they will say that, those who are promoting that we marry our own and stay with our own, that we're racial, that we're racist, and we're causing division and hatred. What would you say to those type of people?
I would say that we're racist, and you say that we're racist and we're causing division.
Yeah, and hateful. Yeah.
I would say do the science. I would say look at the science. Look at the science. It is natural to want to be with the person who looks like you.
So do you think there was a reason why the Most High told Israel to stay with Israel? I mean, other than the fact that the Most High said that, if you marry these other nations, you're going to worship their gods and you're not, you're going to fall away from me. Do you see any other practical reasons that he would have said that? And do you think the Most High still feels that way, that we should stay with our own?
Well, you have to I would look at Jesus's lineage, right? Yeshua's lineage. So in his lineage, does he have some people that are not pure Hebraic origin?
I mean, does he have some Cushites in there, right?
Does he have anyone that's not of pure Hebraic origin? The answer to that would be yes.
Yeah.
You got Ruth, you've got Rahab. So clearly there are people in his lineage that were not strictly Hebrew. So what was the most important thing about them, and why do they wind up in his lineage? What did they choose that made them become a part of that lineage?
They attached themselves to Israel and to their God.
Exactly. So we have to look at that. Is this person attached to you and your God? Is this person heading in the same direction that you are? That's a question I would ask. Are they committed to Yeshua?
So right now, in my opinion, and I don't know if you may have answered this, but
Mhm.
In the modern, I would say, probably the last few years, there's so many young, African Americans, as they call us, marrying outside of their race, and to me, I see it on a personal level, and it's somewhat epidemic. But I saw the statistics in 2017 of 85% of black males marrying black women. Do
Mhm.
you think those stats are still the same, or have they changed? Because I think our people today have no idea of community, no idea of culture, and I'm talking about the young people today.
I think they will change if we continue to raise a group of young people on stereotypes. Because the reality says that the stereotypes are not true. But if all I'm looking at to perceive my reality is what the media is portraying, then that's the route I'm going to go. That's what I meant earlier by self-fulfilling prophecy. You start to live out the images that are before you.
So for those who are, as they call us, African Americans, aka Israelites, descendants of the enslaved, should we promote marriage within our own community amongst our children?
I'm going to say yes, because I'm going to go back to without the black family, there is no other humanity. If you go back to what the law of heredity talks about, when we're talking about the propagation, not just of black humanity, I want to be clear about that, but humanity itself, because everyone else comes from us. So that's what the researcher was sharing with me. Everyone else comes from us. So without black family, there is no other humanity.
Yeah, and I would definitely say we should. If you got children, that's just my opinion. You should promote, that they marry within. I'm not saying go marry a hood rat or anything like that. As some people may call them. But I would say, to marry your own. And for me personally, I think it causes more strife. I mean, marriage in and of itself can be difficult. And if you marry outside of your race, you're dealing with cultural issues as well. And, definitely if you marry the white race, you're dealing with more cultural issues than you're dealing with racism. And when your kids want to go see the other grandparent and the grandparent have to be white, they may be treated a little differently. So, I don't see why our people don't see the problems there, because to me, it goes outside of just you and that person, right? It's more than you and that person. Because, initially you lusting after the person, and now you want to get married, you want to have babies. But then when it comes to bringing the families together from both sides, then you got a problem. Black folks gonna go have barbecues, and they're gonna be outside and have playing their music, and the white culture is gonna be like, look at these people, right? So I'm just saying, that's my opinion. So when it comes down to black love, and it comes down to us healing the wounds, because we have been broken, we have been tormented, we have been, stepped upon and manipulated within our minds, and we didn't even know it. And in a sense, as many said, the scriptures told us to stay with our own. Did we bring all of this on ourselves because we were disobedient?
You think, is that a question for me?
That's a question for you. Do you think we brought all of this on ourselves in terms of, the confusion within our group, whether or not you call us Negroes, African Americans? Because what I see is we have no unity. I remember during my dad's day, they were doing the civil rights movement and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a black identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they married each other, they did things together. I don't see that no more, right? I mean, if you do have some kind of relationship, it's the elite, it's the boule members of our community. But then the rest of them, they don't care about each other. I'm like, how do we get past that and heal that? Because I mean, to me, it starts in the home, but some of us don't even know where to begin.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We talked about this because it is such a entrenched issue, and part of it is if you're looking at our ancestors who came over, they didn't have a choice in some of the things that have happened to them. If you look at the stereotypes, like I said, they have been running literally since the 1900s, right? You have certain things that have happened in our community that are out of our control, but once we know, you should be walking away from tonight. Now that I know, I'm going to work on not buying into these stereotypes. That's why I was saying a lot of what is happening is a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you start taking on the identity that other people give to you, those identities of worthlessness, those identities of, well, hey, they say I'm a Jezebel. If I'm going to get paid money to be that, then that's what I'm going to start projecting, because that's what's getting me money in society. So some of it, yes, is on us by our personal choices and decisions, but understand that some of it is what has been coming down the pipeline this entire time.
Yeah, the war against our people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here, Miss Renee says, I've seen black women here recently killed by their white husbands. I've seen that as well. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because, I mean, is this something, common to every group of people who marry outside their race? Or is this a problem of the slave system and the view of especially it seems to be the white male to his black spouse?
I've actually seen some articles on that. I don't know if I have enough data to actually speak to that, but I will say in a lot of those cases, there's been some white supremacy underlying the person that they married, and they've been tied to these white supremacist groups. So I don't know. They might have been married because there was a fetishization there of the black woman, that caused them to be in this relationship that's now, ending their life. So that I have seen. I have seen the ones that have been abusive, or the ones that have killed. When they start digging a little bit more, it's, they were tied to a white supremacist group. And that, again, is something that if you're choosing to go that route, that's something you have to think about. Because I'm looking at what we're looking at in our country, how many white people are being indoctrinated and turned out into this whole white nationalist movement to begin with. People who are saying, hey, this person was cool with me, and all of a sudden, they're pro Proud Boys, or they're pro white nationalists, or they stormed the Capitol, and even their own family members are like, well, they weren't that way before. But because they're listening to all of this white supremacist propaganda, they have now been indoctrinated into that.
So how are you a Proud Boy member and married to a black woman? I just don't understand that one. Can you explain that to me?
Well, I just said, there's probably some fetishizing of black people involved. In other
Even
words,
though they hate us?
Well, fetishizing has to do with sexual power and control. So if, again, it's going back to those stereotypes, especially the one with Jezebel, right? So the slave master has had people enslaved, but he was still sleeping with the enslaved women.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There was a fetishizing of black women and our sexuality that goes on. And there are people, unfortunately, that are in relationships with people just because of that.
Because I've watched videos as well of black women being in relationships, and sometimes it's even a black man with a white woman, and they would call them the N-word. And I'm like, well, how are you still in that relationship? It just seems to me once they apologize, because our people quick to forgive. But I'm like, to me, that shows you the heart, right? I mean, because what comes out the mouth is what's in the heart. And, I have a problem with our people sometimes because, they're so quick to not look at the root cause, right? And sometimes, they're like, well, I'm just going to pray for them. I'm praying. Well, yeah, you could do that. You could do that. But, when you end up with the situation where, like, when we saw the white man kill, the black woman, then whose fault is that? And I'm not telling anybody what to do, who to marry, whatever.
Yeah.
Right? It just seems to me that it causes more trouble than it solves. I mean, our people, like you were saying, they sort of believe the hype that there's not enough successful and black men, but there are black men and good black men, but they're not choosing them. Same thing with the brothers. They're marrying white women and they're marrying Asian women. And, I don't understand that one either, other than social conditioning.
Exactly. I think you named it exactly what it is. It's social conditioning. And that's why I wanted to present some data and I wanted us to dive into these stereotypes, because if your mind says, or if you are buying into black women are, angry, black women don't want to be with black men, black women, are just bossy and can't be told any, like, if you're buying into all of that, then yes, you are going to go and look for something else. That's why I said it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because now these stereotypes really in our community, they're on autopilot on both sides.
Yeah, I agree.
They really are with younger people. That's why if you have some young people tonight, please share this with them. These stereotypes are on autopilot. So if I don't back up and I don't say who gave me these stereotypes, why are we seeing ourselves this way? Why are we continuing to support media that puts out these images about us and nothing else? Accountability in that regard is going to have to start with us. We're going to have to say, listen, we have positive images of black people that we want presented. And if you're not going to give us that, then we need to be withholding our dollars. But we have too many people who love their television, who love their shows, who love their series, that they're not willing to pull back their dollar. They're not willing to pull back their viewership and say, no, I need you to give us a different picture, because this is not us. This is what you want us to believe about ourselves. You got to give us something different. And if we never demand or never require something different, it will never come.
So in the scriptures, we know, and I was looking at the chat, we know that Timothy's father was a Hebrew, and I think the mother was a Greek, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we see, as you mentioned, throughout there was some intermixing within the Israelite community. So what do you think about the biblical standard of Israel staying with Israel? Because I mean, obviously, like you said, they did marry other nations, but it sort of brings me back to the idea like this, right? Remember when they asked Yeshua about divorce?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay, it wasn't always so, but because of your hard heart, God allowed it. And I think it's sort of the same thing, like even when they married outside, right? God allows it sometime, even though, the law says stay with your own. Do you think that is a valid viewpoint? Because it seems to me that, even when you look at all of creation, right? Most of creation stay with their own groups, right? The hummingbirds stay with the hummingbirds, and the lions stay with the lioness, and you know what I'm saying? So that's the natural course of things, right? Now, every now and then there's a diversion. Now, I'm not comparing us to animals. I'm just talking about the natural course of, creation. Is it the natural course for creation to stay with their own, or is it, okay to say, okay, let's have the rainbow, let's have the zebras, let's, you know what I'm saying? What's your thoughts on that?
So again, I'm going to go back to kind of what we were talking about earlier with the slide presentation. When you look at heredity says that if you have a dominant trait and you're with a dominant trait, you're going to produce the dominant. In other words, people of color are the dominant in the world, not American society, the world. Okay. White people studied this and realized if we keep getting with those who have the dominant trait, there's not going to be any more of us. So white people, a lot of white people, as a matter of fact, said the recessives, because they are the recessive trait, the recessives need to stay with the recessives in order for the recessive to continue to produce. So if you have that viewpoint, and it's not because we're doing this because we're superior to somebody else, or we're doing this because we think somebody else is inferior, I don't see a problem with it. The problem comes when you're saying we're doing this and everybody else doesn't need to exist. We're doing this and everybody else is inferior to us. So to me, that is also about intent. What is your intention behind it? And then, like I said before, the Most High looked on a relationship like Ruth and Boaz, right? She was willing to follow his God. She was willing to follow the Most High. So it wasn't just, to me, it wasn't just this free for all thing. It's, does this person share my belief? Does this person share my faith?
Yeah, and I guess for me, I'm a little complex. Well, I'm I have difficulties with how things were and how the New Testament version fits in because I know even in the Old Testament, foreigners lived amongst Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They got circumcised, and you know they did pretty much everything the Israelites did. But the Most High still said, "Don't marry their daughters. Don't give your sons to your sons to their daughters, and your daughters to their sons." And uh, but yet they were following and living amongst Israel. But God said, don't you marry them. Now, some people will look at that as Old Testament law, but now we also have the fact that some of them are believers now, and so now they are um, part of the believing family, right? They're part of the family of God through faith in Yeshua. And so, I think that sort of brings in some complexities. But guess what? The way I see it, their extended family is not. Many of their extended families are not converted. And
Mm-hmm.
so, when you may marry a converted person, you're still marrying their family, which isn't or may not be converted, right? So I think that adds complexity. Thanks for coming on, Sister Shantae, and I really enjoyed the presentation. And can you tell everyone again how to get in contact with you and how to follow your ministry?
Let me do my little share screen here again.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Did I pardon me? I did have a slide up. Sorry, it's letting me back in. All right. There we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Again, I want to thank you guys for allowing me to be on and have this conversation. If you want to email me about tonight's conversation and you want the slides, you can email me at thedaringdialogues@gmail.com. If you would like to give, it's Cash App Life Nation, paypal.me/Life Nation. And if you would like to find out more about my professional life and opportunities, you can go to robertandshantaeglobal.com. Again, I want to thank you all for allowing me in to have this conversation. Like you said, it is complicated, it's extensive, and we gotta keep talking to each other and not at each other. And I just hope that what I presented tonight has added to that conversation that hopefully you're having in your own homes and in your own communities. I'm going to just encourage you to continue to love each other. Without Black family, there is no other family. We are the source DNA. Nobody can take that truth away from us.
And family, just to let you know that nobody's telling you what to do. It's family conversation about black families, black life, and the whole thing of being an Israelite, right? I mean, that's between you and the Most High. When it comes down to it, nobody's going to tell you what to do, but you should have information. You should have the truth and have understanding. And also, I want to thank the all of the super chats. Thank you all who gave today. I want to thank all the Cash App givers and Patreons. We really appreciate it. And please go ahead and write down that information for Sister Shantae's Cash App and PayPal and her email address. Because you're not going to get this kind of information everywhere. And you can tell she put in a lot of time. So please support her. All right. Thank you, Sister Shantae. And we're going to have to do this again. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Everyone take care and be blessed.
All right.